You ever have one of those days where everything feels normal, and then suddenly life hits you like a freight train? Well, that's exactly what happened to me and my wife. Before I start, hit that subscribe button so you never miss another crazy real-life HOA story. Because what happened next? Nobody would have believed it unless they saw it. I was in the yard working on my truck, enjoying the sunshine, when suddenly a black SUV pulled into our driveway. No plates, no markings. These guys stepped out wearing fake badges and sunglasses, like they rehearsed intimidation in a mirror. My heart rate spiked, and if you're listening, please subscribe, because this story only gets wilder. One of them walked up and said, "Sir, step aside. Your wife needs to come with us. HOA orders." My stomach dropped. My wife stood behind me, confused, shaking, trying to understand what was happening. And honestly, if you're here right now, hit subscribe, because what comes next is something no homeowner should ever have to face. I stared at these men and said, "You've got the wrong house. And the wrong family." The so-called officer smirked and reached toward my wife like she was property. Something snapped inside me. Not fear, not panic, clarity. I took a breath, steady and cold, because they messed with someone they should have never touched. See, years ago, I wasn't just a regular guy mowing lawns and paying dues. I was a Navy SEAL. And while those days are behind me, the training never leaves. My voice dropped low and calm as I warned them. Take one more step, and you won't like what happens. But they didn't listen. The tallest one grabbed my wife's arm, and in that moment, instinct took control. 1 second he was smug, the next, he was on the ground screaming, holding a broken wrist. The second guy lunged at me. I blocked, countered, and his shoulder popped like a dry twig. Now both men were screaming instead of pretending to be law enforcement. My wife rushed behind me, terrified but safe, and I pulled out my phone to call the real authorities. The injured impersonators tried blaming the HOA, claiming they had rights. But rights don't come from fear, fake badges, or manufactured power. They come from law, decency, and respect. When the real sheriff arrived, he took one look at the scene and sighed like this wasn't the first time dealing with nonsense like this. The fake cops tried claiming I assaulted them. But the sheriff just raised a brow and said, "So, you just walked onto private property and tried kidnapping someone with no warrant and no identification?" Turns out, these guys weren't law enforcement. They were hired muscle, sent by the HOA president who believed my wife violated rules by reporting his harassment last month. He thought intimidation would shut us up. Instead, it exposed him. The sheriff handcuffed the impersonators, then called backup to go after the HOA president. My wife was shaking, crying, not from fear, but from finally being heard. I wrapped my arms around her and whispered, "You're safe. I promise." And in that moment, I meant every word. Later that evening, the sheriff returned with updates. The HOA president was arrested and facing multiple charges including impersonating law enforcement, attempted kidnapping, and harassment. The sheriff looked at me and said, "I'm glad you handled yourself, but next time, call us first." I smiled and replied, "Next time, I hope there isn't one." Neighbors came out the next morning whispering, gossiping, pretending they didn't know what happened, when deep down, everyone knew the HOA had finally pushed the wrong person. But instead of hiding, my wife stood tall. She knew silence protects bullies, and speaking up exposes them. The HOA board tried to distance themselves, acting like they had no idea what their president was doing. But after a full investigation, the board was replaced, and new rules were put in place to prevent abuse of power. For the first time in years, our neighborhood finally felt safe. Now every time I see a neighbor walking their dog or grabbing mail, they smile, not out of politeness but relief. The fear that used to hover over the community like fog has finally lifted. And honestly, that peace is worth more than any HOA fine, rule, or meeting. So if you're listening to this and thinking, nothing like that would ever happen in my neighborhood, just know, power attracts people who abuse it. And sometimes, you have to stand your ground. Not with violence, not with rage, but with courage, truth, and a refusal to be controlled. And before we end this story, let me say one thing clearly. Never let anyone convince you they have authority over your freedom or your family without proof. You have rights. You have a voice. And you deserve to feel safe in your own home. If you enjoyed this crazy chapter of HOA insanity, make sure you subscribe, because I've got more real stories that'll leave you speechless. Drop a comment, share your thoughts, and tell me, has your HOA ever crossed a line? Take care. Stay aware. And remember, sometimes the quietest neighbor is the one you should never underestimate.